Brandon Lloyd had one of the strangest NFL careers in recent memory. For the majority of his career, Lloyd was looked at as a below-average to average wide receiver. His skill level was clearly very high, but too often was his potential wasted. He was drafted in the 4th round of the 2003 NFL Draft by the San Francisco 49ers. He had a mini breakout year in 2005 with 733 yards and 5 touchdowns, which spurred Washington to cough up a 3rd and 4th round pick in exchange for him. They then handed him a 6-year, $30 million contract with $10 million guaranteed, which was huge at the time. That 2-year stint wound up being a colossal failure as Lloyd caught just 25 passes for 379 scoreless yards in 23 games. No number 2 wide receiver in NFL history has started more games while producing less than Lloyd did in 2006. He spent a year in Chicago in 2008 and quickly became a favorite target of quarterback Kyle Orton, catching 15 passes in the first 4 games, but a knee injury forced him to miss 5 games and fall out of favor with the coaching staff, finishing the year with just 26 catches. Over these first 6 years of Lloyd's career, he became famous for making a number of jaw-dropping, acrobatic, one-handed catches, but he also had a habit of dropping a lot of passes and making mental mistakes. He often alligator-armed passes and infamously even ducked under a pass thrown directly to him. This unkind reputation, coupled with his injury history, left Lloyd unsigned after his Chicago stint until June 2009 when he was signed by the Broncos, where he was reunited with quarterback Kyle Orton, whom Denver acquired in the blockbuster trade of Jay Cutler. Lloyd was inactive all season until the final 2 games when he immediately regained his rapport with Orton, catching 8 passes for 117 yards. It was a sign of things to come. Lloyd re-signed with Denver in the offseason for a veteran's minimum deal and continued his hot streak from the end of the previous season in training camp, quickly moving up the depth chart. He immediately showed the league that 2010 was going to be different when he blew up in Week 1 against the Jaguars for 5 catches and 117 yards, the same amount of yards he had picked up throughout all of 2009. Some understandably dismissed this performance as a fluke based on Lloyd's previous reputation, but those thoughts were quickly subdued when he caught 22 passes for 419 yards and 3 touchdowns over a 3-game stretch during weeks 3 through 5. The highlight performance of this stretch was a 169-yard game against the Colts, in which he caught a 48-yard touchdown and a 61-yard catch and run on which he juked out 4 separate defenders. That was the first of 2 nice 169-yard games for Lloyd in 2010, as he put up the same total again in Week 8 on 7 catches against the 49ers. Lloyd caught a season-long 71-yard bomb in this game and later showed his fancy footwork in the 4th quarter with a sideline grab and a 1-yard touchdown catch. Lloyd also had a big game against the Ravens, catching 2 40-plus yard bombs for touchdowns from Orton in a 5 for 135 and 2 affair. At the halfway mark of the 2010 season, it was clear that Brandon Lloyd was in the midst of a magical season. Through 8 games, he had already set a career high in receiving yards for a single season. His previous high was 733 yards in 2005, and he easily eclipsed that with a whopping 878 yards in his first 8 games. In Week 10, he caught 6 balls for 90 yards and 2 scores in a blowout win over the Chiefs. He was simply unstoppable despite the Chiefs constantly double-teaming him as he made acrobatic catch after acrobatic catch. Lloyd openly attributed much of his success to Josh McDaniels' play calling and Kyle Orton's willingness to throw him the ball constantly. However, thanks to a disappointing slow start with a 3-9 record and a videotaping scandal, McDaniels was fired in early December. After Orton's hot start to the year, he also suffered a late-season catastrophic meltdown. He routinely just completely missed Lloyd running wide open for what would have been easy touchdowns. Lloyd had to often bail out Orton's bad passes with insane catches like this, with defenders draped all over him. In 2 December losses in which Denver scored only 19 total points, Orton completed just 40% of his passes on 4 yards per attempt, with 0 touchdowns and 5 turnovers. He was then benched for Tim Tebow, which wasn't much better. Despite all of this, Brandon Lloyd still produced. While all other Broncos receivers' numbers suffered when Tebow took over, Lloyd's did not, the sign of a great receiver. Despite Tebow missing on easier throws than Orton did, Lloyd was still able to haul in numerous essentially lob passes. In the final 3 games of the season, Lloyd put up 14 grabs for 228 yards and 2 scores. Yes, it's a small sample size, but extrapolated over 16 games, those numbers would lead to a 74-catch, 1,400-yard, 10-touchdown season, which is oddly actually very similar to what Lloyd actually put up in 2010. In Brandon Lloyd's magical 2010 season, he led the entire NFL with 1,448 receiving yards. This number was 59 yards better than Roddy White's second-place mark, but Lloyd didn't have the luxury of a future Hall of Famer throwing him the ball. Lloyd's yardage total wound up being over twice as much as his previous career high in a season. For context, Lloyd had accumulated only 2,370 yards in the first 7 years of his career. That's over 81 games, 29.3 yards per game. His 11 touchdown catches, which ranked 4th in the league, was just 4 fewer than the total from his first 7 seasons. Even with Lloyd's supreme athleticism, this season came out of nowhere. Even most of his staunchest supporters had given up on him by this point. Lloyd was 4th in the league in targets with 153, but due to his poor QB play, only 15th in receptions with 77. Therefore, among players with at least 100 targets, he led the NFL in yards per reception with a mark of 18.8. He was 2nd in the league in catches over 20 yards with 23. Lloyd graded out as Pro Football Focus's best receiver in the league in 2010 with a 90.7 grade. The PFF figure yards per route run takes into account the number of snaps a player went into a pass pattern, which provides a better indicator of production than yards per reception or even yards per target. Lloyd finished 2nd in the league in this category with 2.4 yards per route run. This was behind only Tennessee's Kenny Britt, though Britt only started 7 games and thus had less targets than Lloyd did receptions. Lloyd also had the 8th lowest drop percentage in the league per PFF, showing strong hands that had plagued him earlier in his career. Sure, Lloyd may have seen a ton of targets come his way that may have inflated his stats a bit, but he also made positive plays at a higher frequency than his peers, and he was also to make big plays more often. Lloyd secured the most big plays in the league per PFF with 24, but he also had the highest percentage of them at 3.99%, way ahead of Calvin Johnson's second place of 3.23. In terms of strictly positive plays, Lloyd again was on top of the league with a mark of 13.29%, which was over a full percentage point than Percy Harvin's second place. Finally, when it comes to negatively graded plays, Lloyd had just 11, which made for the 3rd lowest percentage in the league at 1.83%, behind only Calvin Johnson and Andre Johnson. Lloyd went from being nearly out of the league to a Pro Bowler and 2nd team All-Pro in 2010, and he was legitimately great and efficient that season. It's not as if he just feasted on an inordinate number of volume targets. Unfortunately, that success would be fleeting, however. Even with Kyle Orton's inaccuracy woes showing up again to start 2011, Lloyd still put up 18 catches for 263 yards over his first 3 games. Orton, however, was benched in Denver's 5th game, and less than a year after leading the league in receiving, Lloyd was then traded to the Rams for just a conditional 6th-round pick the following week. In St. Louis, Lloyd was reunited with Josh McDaniels, who is now the Rams' offensive coordinator. And while he was able to put up respectable box score numbers, 51 catches, 683 yards, and 5 scores in 11 games, to go with a respectable 82.4 PFF grade, he was not able to overcome his poor quarterback play this time. He caught just 43% of his 117 targets in St. Louis, as a hobbled Sam Bradford, Kellen Clemens, and A.J. Feely were all somehow steep downgrades on Orton. The Rams tied for the worst record in the league at 2-14 and had the worst offense in the NFL, both per point scored and DVOA. Their quarterbacks threw just 9 touchdowns in 16 games. It was simply a disaster all around, and thus Lloyd moved on after the season. Lloyd signed with the Patriots in March, where he was once again reunited with none other than Josh McDaniels. He seemed like the perfect fit to fill the Randy Moss role in New England, but he quickly fell behind in the pecking order. Despite the vast quarterback improvement with Tom Brady throwing him passes, Lloyd still caught just 56% of his targets. He only had 2 100 games all year despite playing all 16 games, and he averaged a career-low 12.3 yards per catch. At age 32, his athleticism began to wane and he became a catch-and-fall receiver, as his yards after the catch ranked 115th in the league. Still, though, he came on at the end of the year, putting up 452 yards in his final 6 games, including the playoffs. Despite this and his cheap contract, however, the Patriots released him after only 1 year. More reports of Lloyd being a bad teammate and having, quote, erratic behavior in the locker room began to swirl. In the end, Lloyd wound up sitting out the entire 2013 season. He reportedly turned down at least 6 inquiring teams in favor of portraying Sergeant Chuck Lloyd in the direct-to-DVD zombie film After Effect, in which he had 1 speaking line and less than a minute of screen time. All footage of this Daniel Baldwin film has effectively been scrubbed from the internet. Lloyd made his NFL comeback in April 2014 when he signed with San Francisco, where he started his career. As merely a situational receiver, it was a forgettable experience. He played just 24 snaps per game and caught 14 passes total across 14 games. His highlight was running past Janoris Jenkins and catching an 80-yard touchdown pass from Colin Kaepernick on Monday Night Football. Catching just 4 passes for 42 yards over the 49ers' final 8 games, Lloyd's career ended with not a bang, but a whimper. Brandon Lloyd was one of the most physically gifted wide receivers in recent NFL memory. He put that talent on display for the whole world to see in 2010 when he led the NFL in receiving. His 1,448 yards that season still stands as the 3rd highest total in Broncos history, behind Demaryius Thomas in 2014 and Rod Smith in 2000. It was a legitimately elite season by any standards. Lloyd had all the tools in the world, but thanks to bad quarterback play, ever-changing coaching staffs, and a sometimes questionable attitude, he was never able to recapture that magic. Lloyd was truly a unique athlete that shouldn't be forgotten, though. He claims that he was nicknamed Hot Dog in Little League football because he always made things more difficult than they had to be. He was never satisfied. Quote, "The competition wasn't enough for me. I'd let the ball go a little further and I'd dive and catch it. In baseball, I'd let the ball ride a little bit, then I'd run, chase it down, dive, roll, and jump up and throw the ball to the infield. My imagination was always in control of my physical being." And that is the perfect description of how unique an athlete Brandon Lloyd truly was.